My husband left me sitting alone at our anniversary dinner. Just stood up, checked his phone, and walked out before dessert even arrived. The waiter asked if everything was okay with my meal. I looked at that empty chair across from me, at the candlelight flickering between us like it was mocking me, and I realized something. Everything was wrong. But not with the meal. With my marriage. So, I did something that night that I should have done years ago. I checked him out. Not of the resort. Of my life. We arrived at the resort on a Thursday afternoon, and I remember thinking that maybe this trip would fix us. Maybe the ocean breeze and the sound of waves crashing against the shore would wash away all the silence that had built up between us over the past 2 years. Maybe the tropical sun would melt the coldness that had settled into our home like winter frost that never quite thawed. He held my hand when we checked in, and for a brief moment, I felt something that resembled hope. The receptionist smiled at us, called us a beautiful couple, asked if we were celebrating anything special. He squeezed my hand and said our anniversary, and I wanted to believe that squeeze meant something. I wanted to believe we still had a chance. The room was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a king-sized bed with white linens that looked like clouds, a balcony where you could watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. I unpacked our suitcases while he stood on that balcony, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and measured in a way that made my stomach turn. I told myself it was work. It was always work. He was a corporate attorney, always on call, always needed somewhere by someone for something urgent. That's what I told myself as I hung up my dresses in the closet, as I arranged my shoes by the door, as I pretended not to notice how long that phone call lasted. That evening, we had dinner reservations at the resort's main restaurant. It was supposed to be romantic, the kind of place where they dim the lights just enough that everyone looks beautiful in the glow, where the music is soft jazz that wraps around you like a warm embrace, where the menu doesn't have prices because if you have to ask, you probably shouldn't be there. I wore a red dress, the one he used to say made me look like I could stop traffic. I did my makeup carefully, spent almost an hour on my hair, sprayed on the perfume he bought me 3 Christmases ago. I wanted to look like the woman he fell in love with 9 years earlier, before the mortgage and the arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash and the nights we spent in the same bed, but somehow miles apart. He wore the navy suit I bought him for his birthday, the one that made his eyes look even bluer than they already were. When I came out of the bathroom, he glanced up from his phone and said I looked nice. Not beautiful, not stunning, just nice. The same word you'd use to describe a pleasant afternoon or a decent cup of coffee. But I smiled anyway, linked my arm through his, and we walked to the restaurant like we were still the couple from our wedding photos, the ones where we couldn't stop smiling, where our eyes held promises we actually believed we'd keep. The hostess seated us at a table by the window. The ocean stretched out before us, dark and infinite, reflecting the lights from the resort like scattered diamonds. Our table had a candle burning between us, casting shadows that danced across his face every time he moved. The waiter brought us menus, asked if we wanted to start with cocktails or wine. He ordered a scotch, neat. I asked for a glass of white wine, something crisp and light that wouldn't sit too heavy in my already nervous stomach. When the waiter left, I reached across the table and took his hand. He let me hold it, but his fingers didn't curl around mine the way they used to. They just lay there, passive, like he was tolerating my touch rather than wanting it. I tried to start a conversation. I asked him about work, about the big case he'd been working on for months, about whether he thought he'd win. He gave me short answers, his eyes drifting to his phone every few seconds, that little screen lighting up his face in a way that made him look like a stranger. I asked him if he remembered our first date, the Italian restaurant downtown where the waiter spilled red wine on the tablecloth and we laughed so hard we cried. He said of course he remembered, but his tone suggested otherwise. It was the voice you use when someone asks if you've completed a task and you haven't but you don't want to admit it, so you just say yes and hope they don't ask for details. Our drinks arrived. I raised my glass and tried to make a toast.
To us, I said.
To 9 years, and hopefully 90 more. He touched his glass to mine, but there was no warmth in his eyes, no smile on his lips. He took a long drink of his scotch and set the glass down harder than necessary. Then his phone buzzed. He picked it up, read whatever message had just come through, and something changed in his expression. His jaw tightened. His eyes sparked with something I hadn't seen in months. Interest.
Excitement.
Life. I asked him who it was. He said it was nothing, just work. But I've been married to this man for 9 years. I know the difference between his work face and whatever that was. That wasn't the expression of someone reading about depositions or court dates. That was the face of someone reading something they wanted to read, something that made them feel something. My chest tightened, but I didn't push. I never pushed. That was always my problem. I was too understanding, too patient, too willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, even when the doubt was screaming in my face. The waiter came to take our order. I chose the sea base. He ordered the steak, medium rare, same thing he always orders everywhere we go. The waiter asked if we wanted an appetizer to share. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to suggest something like he used to. But he was scrolling through his phone again, his thumb moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. I told the waiter no, just the entrees would be fine. When the waiter left, I asked my husband to put his phone away.
Please, I said.
Just for tonight. Can we just be present with each other? He looked at me like I'd asked him to cut off his hand. He said he was waiting for an important email, that he'd put it away as soon as it came through. I nodded and took another sip of my wine, feeling it burn slightly as it went down, wishing it would burn away the lump forming in my throat. Our appetizers arrived, even though we hadn't ordered any. The waiter explained that the chef wanted to send something special for the anniversary couple. It was bruschetta, fresh tomatoes and basil on toasted bread drizzled with balsamic glaze. It looked beautiful. I thanked the waiter and looked at my husband, hoping this would spark something, some appreciation for the gesture, some acknowledgement that we were supposed to be celebrating. He took one piece, spit into it, chewed mechanically, and went back to his phone. I ate mine slowly, tasting nothing, feeling the tears building behind my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. Not here. Not in public. Not when I'd worked so hard to look beautiful for him. Then his phone rang. Not buzzed.
Rang.
Loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. He looked at the screen, and his whole body shifted. He sat up straighter. His eyes went wide. He answered it before the second ring finished. He said hello in that voice, the one he used to use with me, warm and eager and fully present. He stood up without excusing himself, without even looking at me, and walked toward the restaurant's entrance, his free hand gesturing as he talked, his voice fading as he moved further away. I sat there alone at our table. The candle kept burning. The ocean kept rolling. The music kept playing. But I was alone. On our anniversary. At a romantic dinner that cost more than most people spend on rent. I looked around and saw other couples holding hands across tables, feeding each other bites of dessert, laughing at private jokes. I saw what we used to be reflected in their faces, and I felt something inside me crack. Not break. Not yet. Just crack, like ice on a pond when winter is ending and spring is beginning to push through. The waiter returned with our entrees. He looked at the empty chair, then at me, concern flickering across his professional expression. He asked if everything was all right with my companion. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to say no. Nothing is all right. My husband just abandoned me at our anniversary dinner to take a phone call from someone who matters more to him than I do. But instead, I smiled and said he'd be right back. Work emergency, you know how it is. The waiter nodded sympathetically and set both plates down, told me to enjoy, and disappeared. I stared at my husband's steak. Steam rose from it in delicate spirals. The meat was cooked perfectly, still pink in the center, charred on the outside just the way he liked it. I cut into my sea base and took a bite. It was delicious, flaky and tender with a lemon butter sauce that should have made me close my eyes in appreciation. But it tasted like nothing. Like I was chewing paper. I set down my fork and looked toward the entrance, wondering how long this phone call would last, wondering if he'd come back before the food got cold. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. I ate slowly, mechanically, buying time. Other couples finished their meals and left. New couples were seated. The waiter came by twice to ask if I needed anything. I asked for more wine. He brought it without judgment, without questions, just poured it and left me to my solitude. I drank it faster than I should have, feeling it loosen the tightness in my chest just slightly, just enough that I could keep sitting there without completely falling apart. 20 minutes turned into 30. His steak was cold now. I'd finished my fish. The waiter cleared my plate and asked if I'd like to see the dessert menu. I told him I was waiting for my husband to return. He nodded, but I saw pity flash across his face, just for a second, before he masked it with professional courtesy. That look was what did it. That look was what made me realize how pathetic I must appear. A woman alone at an anniversary dinner, making excuses for a man who couldn't even be bothered to come back to the table. I picked up my phone and texted him. "Where are you?" Threats appeared immediately, indicating he was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. Finally, his response came through. "Important call. Don't wait up. Order whatever you want. I'll see you back at the room. Don't wait up." Like I was his mother staying awake to make sure he got home safely from a party. Like this wasn't supposed to be our night, our dinner, our anniversary. I read those 3 words over and over until they stopped making sense, until they were just shapes on a screen, meaningless symbols that represented the end of something I'd been trying so desperately to save. I looked at his empty chair, at his cold steak, at the candle that had burned down halfway, its wax pooling at the base. And something shifted inside me. Not cracked, shattered. But in the shattering, there was clarity. In the breaking, there was truth. He wasn't coming back to this table. And even if he did, it wouldn't matter. Because the man I married, the man who used to look at me like I was his whole world, that man was already gone. Had been gone for longer than I wanted to admit. I'd been sitting at this table alone for months, maybe years, even when he was physically present. The waiter approached cautiously. He asked if I'd like to box up my husband's meal. I looked at that steak, at the food he'd ordered but couldn't be bothered to eat because someone else's voice was more appealing than my company. I told the waiter no. I didn't want it boxed. I asked for the check instead. He hesitated, then nodded and brought it over in a leather folder, the total at the bottom making my eyes water for reasons that had nothing to do with the price. I paid with the credit card we shared, the one that would show up on our joint statement, the one he'd review next month and see this charge from the resort restaurant. I wondered if he'd remember. I wondered if he'd feel anything when he saw it. Probably not. He'd probably just note it as a business expense, something to be categorized and filed away and forgotten, just like me. I signed the receipt, tipped generously because the waiter had been kind, and it wasn't his fault my marriage was imploding over surf and turf. I stood up, smoothed down my red dress, the one my husband said made me look nice, and I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart in pieces. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, warm and thick with salt and the scent of tropical flowers. Other guests passed by me, laughing and holding hands and living the vacation I'd thought we were here to have. I didn't go looking for him. I didn't check the lobby or the bar or the beach. I walked straight back to our room, each step feeling heavier than the last, my heels clicking against the stone pathway like a countdown to something inevitable. When I opened the door, the room was exactly as we'd left it. His suitcase in the corner. My toiletries arranged neatly in the bathroom. The bed still perfectly made. Everything in its place except the one thing that actually mattered. I sat on the edge of that bed, and I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd collapse into sobs, that the weight of what had just happened would crush me into hysteria. But instead, I felt calm. Eerily, unsettlingly calm. Like a storm that had been building for years had finally broken, and now there was just the quiet aftermath, the strange peace that comes after destruction. I looked at my hands, at the wedding ring I'd worn for 9 years, the one he'd slipped on my finger while promising to love me in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. Those promises felt like fairy tales now. Beautiful lies we tell ourselves when we're young and stupid and convinced that love alone is enough to sustain a marriage. I stood up and walked to his suitcase. I unzipped it slowly, methodically. I took out each item of his clothing, each pair of shoes, each toiletry, and I arranged them neatly on the bed. His shirts folded precisely. His pants creased just so. His socks paired and rolled. Everything organized and ready, like I was preparing for him to leave on a trip. Which, in a way, I was. I called the front desk. The same receptionist who checked us in answered, her voice still cheerful and bright even though it was nearly 10 o'clock at night. I told her I needed to make some changes to our reservation. Could she please arrange for a separate room for my husband? And could she also schedule a car to take him to the airport first thing in the morning? There was a pause. A long pause where I could hear her trying to figure out how to respond, whether to ask questions or just do as I requested. She chose the latter.
Of course, she said.
I'll take care of that right away. Would you like me to send someone to help with the luggage? I looked at the neat piles of his belongings on the bed, at the life I'd just systematically packed up and prepared to send away. Yes, I said. Please send someone in about 20 minutes. That should give me enough time to finish. After I hung up, I continued packing. I found his laptop bag and carefully placed his computer inside, along with his chargers and his files, and all the work that was apparently more important than our marriage. I found his bathroom kit and packed his razor, his cologne, his expensive face wash that cost more than my entire makeup collection. I was thorough, meticulous. I didn't want him to have any excuse to come back to this room, to share this space with me, to pretend for even one more night that we were still a couple worth saving. When everything was packed and waiting by the door, I finally let myself look in the mirror. My makeup was still perfect. My hair was still styled. My red dress still fit like it was made for me. But my eyes looked different. Harder. Clearer. Like I'd been looking through fog for years and it had suddenly lifted, revealing a landscape I should have seen all along. I looked like a woman who'd just made a decision. A woman who'd just chosen herself for the first time in a very long time. There was a knock at the door. The bellhop, right on schedule. I opened it and showed him the luggage, gave him the new room number the front desk had assigned my husband. He loaded everything onto his cart without comment, without judgment, just did his job efficiently and professionally. I tipped him and watched him wheel away 9 years of marriage, all of it fitting neatly onto a brass cart that squeaked slightly as it rolled down the hallway. I closed the door and locked it. Deadbolt and chain. I changed out of my red dress and into pajamas, washed off my makeup, brushed out my hair. I didn't know when my husband would return. Didn't know if he was still on that phone call, or if he'd moved on to drinks with whoever had been so important they couldn't wait until morning. It didn't matter anymore. He could stay out all night if he wanted. He could talk to whoever he wanted, for as long as he wanted. It was no longer my concern. I climbed into bed, into the center of that king-size mattress, spreading out in a way I never could when he was there. I turned off the lights and lay in the darkness, listening to the ocean through the open balcony door, feeling the breeze on my skin. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something that wasn't pain or loneliness or desperate hope that things would get better. I felt free. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the balcony doors and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered everything. The dinner. The empty chair. The phone call that mattered more than our anniversary. The suitcases I'd packed. The new room I'd arranged. And I remembered the feeling that had settled over me last night, that strange sense of peace that comes when you finally stop fighting against the inevitable and just let it happen. The bed next to me was empty, undisturbed. He never came back to the room. Part of me wondered where he'd spent the night. The other part, the stronger part, didn't care. I got up and took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the remnants of yesterday, of the woman who would have waited up for him, who would have asked where he'd been, who would have accepted whatever excuse he offered and pretended to believe it. That woman was gone. I'd left her at that dinner table, sitting alone with a cold steak and broken promises. I got dressed in white linen pants and a soft blue tank top, casual and comfortable. I didn't do my makeup. Didn't style my hair beyond pulling it back in a loose ponytail. I looked like someone on vacation, relaxed and unburdened, and the irony wasn't lost on me. I felt more like myself in this moment, the morning after I'd ended my marriage, than I had in years of trying to hold it together. I ordered room service. Coffee, fresh fruit, yogurt, toast with jam. I ate on the balcony, watching other couples walk along the beach below, their footprints disappearing as the tide came in. I wondered about their stories. Were they happy? Were they pretending like I had been? Or were they actually the real thing, the kind of love that survives phone calls and cold dinners and the slow erosion of time? I hoped they were real. Someone's love should be. It was almost 9 o'clock when my phone buzzed. A text from him. Where are my things? I stared at those 4 words, at the question that held no apology, no acknowledgement of the night before, no concern for where I was or how I was feeling. Just a practical inquiry about his belongings, like I was a hotel employee rather than his wife. I typed back slowly, each word deliberate. Check with the front desk. They'll direct you to your new room. Your car to the airport leaves at 11. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. This time the response took longer to come through. What are you talking about? What new room? What car? I could picture his face as he typed that, confusion giving way to irritation, the same expression he wore when something interrupted his carefully planned schedule. I didn't respond. I just set my phone face down on the table and took another sip of my coffee, savoring the way it tasted when I wasn't choking back tears. The phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times until it went to voicemail. He called again. I let that one go too. On the 3rd attempt, I finally answered. Before I could say anything, his voice came through, tight with barely controlled anger. What the hell is going on? Where's my stuff? Why is the front desk telling me I have a different room and a car service I didn't arrange? I listened to him sputter and demand answers, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no anxiety, no urge to smooth things over and make everything okay again. Just a calm, crystalline clarity. I said, simply and evenly, you left me alone at our anniversary dinner last night. You walked out and didn't come back. So I checked you out of our room, out of this vacation, and honestly, out of our marriage. Your things are waiting for you. Your flight is arranged. I think it's time you went home. There was silence on the other end. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who don't need words, but the shocked silence of someone who'd just been confronted with consequences they never thought would come. Then he laughed. Actually laughed, this short, incredulous sound that made my jaw tighten. You're being ridiculous, he said. It was 1 phone call. You're overreacting like you always do. This is exactly why we have problems. You make everything into a drama. The old me would have absorbed that. Would have wondered if he was right, if I was overreacting, if I should apologize and beg him to stay. The new me, the one who'd been born last night over a cold steak and an empty chair, heard those words for what they were. Manipulation. Deflection. The desperate attempt of a man who'd been caught to make his behavior my fault. I took a breath and said, if wanting to be treated with basic respect at my own anniversary dinner is dramatic, then yes, I'm dramatic. If expecting my husband to actually show up for our marriage is overreacting, then I'm overreacting. But I'm done minimizing myself to make room for your indifference. He tried to interrupt, but I kept going, all the words I'd swallowed for years finally pouring out. You didn't even come back to the table, I said. You didn't text me to say when you'd be back or apologize for leaving. You just said don't wait up, like I was an inconvenience you were dismissing. You spent our anniversary on the phone with someone else, and then disappeared for the entire night. And when you finally did contact me this morning, it wasn't to apologize or explain, or even ask if I was okay. It was to ask where your things were. That tells me everything I need to know about where I rank in your life. I could hear him breathing hard on the other end, could imagine him pacing wherever he was, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was frustrated. Look, he said, his voice shifting to that tone he used in court, reasonable and measured and calculated to sound conciliatory. I know I messed up last night. The call ran long, and I lost track of time. But you can't just kick me out like this. We need to talk about this like adults. Come on, let's have breakfast, and discuss this rationally. Rationally. As if there was a rational conversation to be had about him abandoning me at dinner. As if a reasonable discussion could fix the fundamental problem that he simply didn't care enough anymore. I said, we're discussing it. I'm discussing it right now. And I've made my decision. You can either get in that car at 11 or you can make your own arrangements, but either way, you're not staying in this room with me. I'm done sharing space with someone who doesn't want to be in it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said in a low voice that I couldn't quite read, "Who was that phone call with?" The question came out defensive, almost accusatory, like I was the one who needed to explain myself. "It doesn't matter," I said, though we both knew it did. It mattered enormously. Because whether that call had been with a colleague or a client or someone else entirely, the fact remained that he'd chosen it over me. He'd chosen to leave me sitting alone, embarrassed and hurt, while he attended to something he deemed more important. And in making that choice, he'd shown me exactly what our marriage meant to him. "Fine," he said, his voice cold now, the warmth completely gone.
"Fine.
"If that's how you want it, I'll take the car. But you're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away 9 years over one bad night. You're going to regret this." And there it was. The threat disguised as concern, the implication that I was being foolish, that I'd come crawling back once I realized what I'd given up. But he was wrong about something fundamental. It wasn't one bad night. It was one bad night after months of bad days, after years of slow disconnection, after countless times when I'd swallowed my hurt and given him another chance and convinced myself that tomorrow would be better. "I don't think I will regret it," I said quietly. "I think the only thing I'll regret is not doing it sooner." I hung up before he could respond, before he could say anything else that might make me doubt myself. I set the phone down and looked out at the ocean, at the endless blue stretching to the horizon, and I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there until I finally set it down. An hour later, I was at the resort's pool, reading a book I'd brought but never had time to open because I was always too busy worrying about my husband's moods and needs and whether he was happy enough to stay interested in our marriage. The sun was warm on my skin. The water sparkled like liquid sapphire. Other guests lounged on chairs around me, some sleeping, some reading, some just existing in that peaceful vacation haze where time moves differently and responsibilities feel far away. I was halfway through chapter 3 when I heard his voice. He was at the resort lobby, which I could see from my position by the pool. He was talking to the front desk clerk, his arms gesturing emphatically, his face flushed with frustration. I couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but I could read his body language.
He was arguing.
Probably trying to get back into our original room, trying to override the arrangements I'd made, trying to maintain control of a situation that had already slipped through his fingers. The clerk remained calm and professional, shaking her head, pointing to her computer screen, clearly explaining whatever policy prevented her from accommodating his demands. I watched this scene unfold from behind my sunglasses, detached and observing, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. After a few more minutes of increasingly agitated discussion, my husband grabbed his phone and made a call. Probably to the hotel manager. Probably thinking that escalating things would get him what he wanted, because that's how he operated. Louder voice, bigger authority, more pressure, until someone gave in. But 20 minutes later, he was walking toward the front entrance where a black car was waiting. A bellhop followed him with a cart, the same cart that had taken his belongings away last night. He never looked around, never scanned the pool area or the restaurant or anywhere else to find me. He just got in that car, his jaw tight and his shoulders rigid, and drove away. And I felt nothing but relief. A woman at the chair next to mine had been watching too. She was maybe 60, with silver hair and kind eyes and the sort of face that suggested she'd seen some things in her life. She caught my eye and raised her glass of something tropical and colorful in a silent toast. "Sometimes," she said, "the trash takes itself out. You just have to hold the door open." I laughed, actually laughed, and raised my water bottle back at her. "Thank you," I said. I needed to hear that. She smiled and said, "Honey, we've all been there. The only difference is whether we have the guts to do something about it. You've got guts."
Good for you.
We ended up talking for the next hour. Her name was Patricia. She divorced her husband 15 years ago after he'd spent their 20th anniversary at the office, working on a merger that apparently couldn't wait. She told me it was the best decision she'd ever made, that she'd spent the last 15 years traveling and painting and learning to play the piano and doing all the things she'd put on hold to be someone's wife. She told me that loneliness in a marriage is worse than loneliness alone because at least when you're alone, you're not pretending. At least you're not making yourself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be. She asked if I was scared. I thought about it honestly.
Was I?
Scared of going home to an empty house, of telling family and friends, of starting over at 34 when all my friends were posting pictures of their kids and their perfect families on social media?
Yes.
But was I more scared of staying, of spending another 9 years waiting for phone calls to end and hoping my husband would notice me again? Of losing more of myself, trying to save something that was already gone?
No.
That scared me more. I told Patricia that I was terrified but also strangely excited. Like standing on the edge of a cliff, not sure if I could fly, but absolutely certain I couldn't stay where I was. She patted my hand and said that's exactly the right way to feel. Then she told me to order the most expensive thing on the lunch menu, to charge it to the room, to enjoy every bite of this new freedom. So I did. I ordered lobster and champagne and creme brulee, and I savored every moment of it, every flavor an assertion of my own worth, every bite a declaration that I deserved better than cold steaks and empty chairs. That afternoon, I went to the spa, got a massage that worked out knots I didn't even know I'd been carrying, got a facial that made my skin glow, got my nails done in a bright coral color I never would have chosen before because my husband said it was too flashy. I looked at those nails, at the way they caught the light, and I thought about all the small ways I'd been dimming myself. The colors I didn't wear, the opinions I didn't voice, the dreams I didn't chase because they might inconvenience him or require him to adjust his life to accommodate mine. That evening, I had dinner at the same restaurant, asked for the same table by the window. This time, I didn't wait for anyone. I ordered what I wanted, drank wine without counting glasses, talked to the waiter about his recommendations, and actually listened to his answers instead of just nodding absently while worrying about whether my husband was getting impatient. When the dessert menu came, I didn't order one thing. I ordered 3. The chocolate lava cake, the key lime pie, and the tropical fruit sorbet. I tasted all of them, slowly and deliberately, and I didn't share a single bite. The waiter, the same one from the night before, recognized me. He didn't say anything directly, but when he brought the check, there was a note from the chef. It said, "To new beginnings. This one's on us." The desserts hadn't been charged. I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the unexpected kindness of strangers who'd witnessed my humiliation and were now celebrating my liberation. I left a tip that was probably bigger than the original bill and walked out of that restaurant with my head high. Over the next few days, I did everything I wanted to do. I took a surfing lesson and fell off the board more times than I could count but laughed every single time. I went on a snorkeling tour and saw sea turtles and tropical fish in colors I didn't know existed. I sat on the beach at sunset and watched the sky turn impossible shades of pink and orange and didn't take a single picture because I wanted to just be there, fully present, without trying to document it for anyone else's approval. I read 3 books. I slept late. I ordered room service at midnight. I existed completely for myself, maybe for the first time in my adult life. I also made phone calls I'd been dreading. I called my sister, who I'd been avoiding because I didn't want to admit how bad things had gotten. She listened to everything, and when I finished, she said 3 words. Finally. Thank God. Apparently, everyone had seen it but me. Everyone had watched me shrink and accommodate and excuse his behavior while he drifted further away. She told me she'd been waiting for this call for 2 years, hoping I'd wake up, scared I never would. She said she was proud of me. That made me cry more than anything else had. I called my best friend from college, who I'd lost touch with because my husband said she was a bad influence, too opinionated, too feminist, too much of everything he found threatening. She answered on the second ring, and when I told her what had happened, she screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She said she never liked him anyway, that she'd bitten her tongue at our wedding because I seemed happy, but she'd always thought I could do better. She said I should move to her city, that there was an opening at her company, that I could stay with her while I figured things out. For the first time, the future didn't look terrifying. It looked like possibility. I also called a lawyer, a divorce attorney my sister recommended. She was kind but direct, asking questions I didn't want to answer, but needed to. How long had we been married? Did we have kids? Did we own property together? What were my financial concerns? I answered everything honestly, my voice steady even when talking about joint bank accounts and the house we'd bought 3 years ago and the retirement funds we'd been building. She told me I had a strong case for an equitable split, that I shouldn't worry about being left with nothing. But more importantly, she told me I was making the right choice. She'd been practicing family law for 20 years, and she could always tell the difference between people who were giving up too easily and people who'd given too much for too long. I was the latter, she said. Way too much for way too long. On my last day at the resort, I went back to that restaurant one final time. Patricia was there, having lunch with her sister, who'd just arrived for a visit. She waved me over and introduced us. Her sister hugged me like we were old friends and said she'd heard all about me, that I was brave, that she wished she'd had my courage 30 years ago. We ended up spending the afternoon together, 3 women spanning 3 decades, all of us carrying stories of men who didn't deserve us and the freedom we'd found when we finally walked away. Patricia gave me her phone number and email address. She told me to stay in touch, that she wanted to hear how my story continued. She said the first year would be hard, that I'd have moments where I doubted myself, where I wondered if I'd made a mistake, where I'd feel lonely even surrounded by people. But she promised that if I stayed strong, if I refused to go back to someone who'd shown me exactly who he was, I'd come out the other side more myself than I'd ever been. I believed her. I had to. When I checked out of the resort, the receptionist who'd helped me that night was working again. She smiled at me, a real smile that reached her eyes, and asked if I'd enjoyed my stay. I told her I had, more than I'd expected to, and she said she was glad. As she processed my checkout, she said quietly, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but what you did took real strength. I've worked here 5 years, and I've seen so many people stay in situations that hurt them because it's easier than leaving. You chose yourself. That matters. I thanked her and meant it. Her kindness, along with the chef's note and Patricia's wisdom and my sister's relief and my friend's excitement, all of it wove together into a safety net I didn't know I'd been building. I wasn't alone. I'd never really been alone. I'd just been so focused on one person who didn't see me that I'd stopped seeing everyone else who did. The flight home was quiet. I had a window seat and spent most of it looking at clouds, thinking about everything that had happened in 5 days. I'd arrived at that resort married, unhappy, and convinced I needed to try harder to save something that was already dead. I was leaving divorced in all but paperwork, lighter, and more certain of my worth than I'd been in years. The plane touched down just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in those same impossible colors I'd watched from the beach, and I took it as a sign. Every ending is also a beginning. Every sunset promises a sunrise. Going home was surreal. The house looked the same, but felt different. His coffee mug was still in the sink from before we'd left. His jacket was still hanging by the door. Evidence of a life we'd shared, now just objects waiting to be divided and distributed. I walked through each room slowly, seeing it with new eyes. This place that had felt like a prison of polite unhappiness now just felt like a house. Walls and furniture and empty space, waiting to be filled with something better. The next morning, I woke up in our bed, alone, and instead of feeling sad, I felt determined. I called a realtor, put the house on the market, started looking at apartments in my friend's city, small 1-bedrooms with good light and room for just me and whatever life I wanted to build. I called my old boss, the one I'd left when my husband got transferred for work, and asked if there were any openings. Turned out there were. She said she'd always hoped I'd come back, that I'd been one of her best employees, that she'd be happy to have me on the team again. I started packing. Not his things, not our things, just my things. Books I'd bought but never read because I was too busy managing his schedule. Art supplies I'd put away because he said they made the house messy. Clothes I hadn't worn in years because they didn't fit the image of who I thought a lawyer's wife should be. Each item I packed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost along the way. My husband tried calling a few times in those first weeks. I didn't answer. He sent texts that ranged from apologetic to angry to practical questions about dividing assets. I responded only to the practical ones through my lawyer, keeping everything businesslike and final. He showed up at the house once while I was packing. I didn't let him in. We stood on opposite sides of the door, a piece of wood between us that somehow represented everything our marriage had become. He said we should talk. I said we had nothing left to talk about. He said I was being unreasonable. I said I was being clear. He left and I locked the door and I didn't cry. 3 months later, I was settled in my new apartment in my new city with my new job. It was small, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture I'd chosen myself. Every picture on the wall reflected my taste. Every morning I woke up without that knot of anxiety in my stomach, without wondering what mood he'd be in, without bracing myself for another day of being unseen. I was lonely sometimes, yes. But it was a clean loneliness, honest and temporary, not the suffocating loneliness of being invisible to the person who promised to see you forever. Patricia and I talked every week. She became like a mentor, guiding me through the practical and emotional challenges of starting over. She recommended books, sent funny memes, reminded me on hard days why I'd made this choice. My sister visited often, bringing wine and takeout and unconditional support. My best friend introduced me to her circle, welcoming me into a community of strong, independent women who'd all walked similar paths. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. Terrible paintings at first, but they got better. And even when they didn't, I loved making them. 6 months after that night at the resort, the divorce was finalized. I signed papers in a conference room with fluorescent lights and cheap carpet, surrounded by lawyers and documents that reduced 9 years to a series of asset divisions and settlement agreements. It should have felt sad. Maybe it was sad. But mostly it felt like closing a book I'd been trying to finish for too long, one where I already knew the ending wasn't going to be happy, but I kept reading anyway, hoping for a plot twist that never came. I walked out of that office building into a perfect autumn afternoon. The air was crisp, leaves were turning gold and red, and I felt possibility in every breath. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. How'd it go? I typed back. It's done. I'm free. She responded immediately with a champagne emoji and congratulations on your new life. Make it a beautiful one. I thought about that phrase a lot as I walked to my car. Make it a beautiful one. Not wait for someone else to make it beautiful. Not hope circumstances aligned just right. Not sacrifice my own happiness to maintain someone else's comfort. Make it beautiful. Actively. Intentionally. Through choices that honored who I was and what I needed and what I deserved. That night, I went to dinner alone at a nice restaurant. Sat at the bar, ordered the special, talked to the bartender about his recommendations. When a man 2 seats down tried to buy me a drink, I thanked him but declined. Not because I wasn't ready, though maybe I wasn't, but because I didn't need male attention to validate my worth anymore. I'd spent so many years believing I needed my husband's approval, his interest, his presence to be complete. Now I knew the truth. I'd always been complete. He'd just made me forget it. Looking back now, a year after that anniversary dinner, I can see that night at the resort as the catalyst but not the cause. The marriage had been ending for a long time. Every ignored conversation, every dismissed feeling, every time I made myself smaller to avoid conflict, those were all little endings leading to the final one. He didn't leave me alone at dinner. He'd been leaving me alone for years. I just finally noticed. People ask if I regret it, if I miss him, if I wonder what would have happened if I'd given him another chance. The answer is no. I don't miss who he'd become, and I don't miss who I'd become trying to love him. I miss the idea of him, maybe. The man I thought I married, the one who existed in wedding photos and early memories. But that man had been gone long before I packed those suitcases. I was just finally ready to admit it. What I've learned in this year is that leaving isn't the hard part. The hard part is recognizing you need to leave. The hard part is admitting that love alone isn't enough, that you can care about someone and still need to walk away, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Once you cross that threshold, once you truly understand that staying will destroy you more than leaving ever could, the actual leaving becomes almost easy. Not painless, but necessary. And sometimes necessity is its own kind of gift. I'm different now. Stronger, yes, but also softer in some ways. More open to vulnerability, because I'm not protecting myself from someone who's supposed to be on my team. I laugh more. I sleep better. I take up space without apologizing for it. I make plans based on what I want, not what someone else needs. I've started dating again, casually, nothing serious, and I'm amazed at how different it feels when someone actually listens when I talk, when they show up for plans they've made, when they treat my time as valuable as their own. These basic acts of respect that I'd convinced myself were too much to ask for are actually just the baseline. I'd been settling for so far below the baseline that I'd forgotten where it was. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who's sitting across from someone who's checked out but won't leave, who's making excuses for behavior they'd never accept from a friend, who's convinced they need to try harder when they've already tried everything, I want you to hear this. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be chosen. You deserve to sit at a dinner table with someone who wants to be there. And if you don't have that, it's not because you're not enough. It's because you're with someone who isn't capable of appreciating what you bring to the table. My husband didn't leave me alone at dinner. I left a marriage where I'd been alone all along. And yes, it was terrifying. Yes, there were nights I cried myself to sleep and mornings I woke up panicked about the future. Yes, there were moments I almost texted him, almost convinced myself to try again, almost let fear override everything I knew to be true. But I didn't. I sat with the discomfort. I built a new life, piece by piece, day by day, choice by choice. And now, standing in that new life, looking back at where I was, I can't believe I waited as long as I did. The resort sent me an email a few months ago, a promotion for anniversary packages. I laughed when I saw it, this strange cosmic joke, this reminder of where it all ended and began. I didn't book it, but I did forward it to Patricia with a message, same time next year? She wrote back immediately. Absolutely. But this time we're celebrating freedom, not mourning the past. We're going next month. Just two friends, no husbands, no expectations, no cold dinners and empty chairs. Just two women who chose themselves and lived to tell about it. So here's what I want you to take from my story. Marriage is supposed to add to your life, not subtract from it. Partnership is supposed to make you feel more yourself, not less. And if you find yourself disappearing, shrinking, accommodating so much that you don't recognize who you've become, that's not love asking you to change. That's fear asking you to stay small. Don't do it. Don't waste years of your life waiting for someone to see you who's already shown you they're looking elsewhere. Don't let one bad night turn into one bad year, turn into one bad decade. That night at the resort, when I sat at that table alone, when I made the choice to pack his bags and end our marriage, I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward myself. Toward the woman I'd been before I learned to dim my light. Toward the life I deserved but was too scared to claim. Toward mornings without dread and evenings without loneliness disguised as companionship. It was the scariest thing I've ever done. It was also the best thing I've ever done. My ex-husband called me last month. First time I'd heard his voice in almost a year. He said he'd been thinking about me, about us, about what went wrong. He said maybe we'd given up too quickly. Maybe we should try again. Maybe I'd overreacted and he'd underappreciated what we had and maybe. I listened to all of it. And then I said no. Not angrily, not bitterly, just clearly and finally.
No.
Because I knew something now that I hadn't known before. Some things can't be fixed. And even if they could be, you don't owe it to anyone to keep trying to repair what they broke. I hung up that call, and I didn't feel sad or relieved or anything dramatic. I just felt certain. Certain that I'd made the right choice. Certain that the life I'd built without him was better than the life I'd had with him. Certain that being alone and happy beats being partnered and miserable every single time. Certain that I never, ever wanted to go back to being the woman who waited at that table, who made excuses, who blamed herself for someone else's choices. So if you're reading this and relating to it, if you see pieces of your own story in mine, please hear me when I say this. You don't have to wait for a dramatic moment. You don't need him to leave you at a dinner or forget your anniversary or have an affair. If you're unhappy, if you're lonely in your own relationship, if you're tired of being unseen, that's enough. Your unhappiness is enough of a reason. You don't need permission from anyone, not from him, not from your family, not from some cosmic sign that makes the decision feel easier. You just need to decide that you matter, that your life matters, that your happiness matters more than his comfort or convenience. The woman I was at that resort dinner feels like someone I knew long ago. She was sad and desperate and convinced her worth was tied to whether her husband loved her. The woman I am now knows better. Knows that love shouldn't make you smaller. Knows that the right person doesn't make you beg for basic respect. Knows that walking away from something that's hurting you isn't giving up. It's growing up. It's finally choosing yourself. I'm not saying divorce is always the answer. I'm not saying every bad night means the marriage is over. What I'm saying is that you know, deep down, past all the justifications and excuses and hopes that things will magically improve, you know if you're in something that's enriching your life or erasing it. You know if you're with someone who values you or someone who takes you for granted. You know if you're staying because you're happy or because you're scared. And if you're scared, I promise you, the fear of leaving is temporary. But the pain of staying when you shouldn't? That becomes permanent. That becomes who you are. I checked my husband out of our marriage that night at the resort. But really, I checked myself back into my own life, back into my own value, back into the understanding that I deserved better than cold dinners and empty promises and a man who couldn't be bothered to show up. I chose me, finally, definitively, completely. And I haven't regretted it for a single second. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship, if you've ever sat at a table alone while your partner was somewhere else, physically or emotionally, I want you to know you're not alone. Thousands of people are struggling with this same pain right now. By sharing this story, by letting it reach someone who needs to hear it, you might be giving them the permission they need to choose themselves too. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story about finding strength in the hardest moments. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose life you might change by simply passing it along. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment where you realized you had to choose yourself? What did that look like for you? I read every single comment, and I want to hear your story too. Remember, you are not too much. You are not asking for too much. You are not overreacting. You deserve to be seen, chosen, and celebrated. And if you're not getting that where you are, it's time to go find it somewhere else. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, choose yourself. Always choose yourself.